They thought they were sending her into obscurity, a quiet corner of the school grounds to break her pride. But instead, they dropped her into the pages of a secret no one had dared to read in years. Some stories don't start with fate knocking. They begin with someone slamming a door in your face and hoping you vanish into silence. If you've ever rooted for the underdog, the quiet fighter who refuses to shrink, then like and subscribe. Because what I'm about to tell you is the kind of story that stirs something deep. I first saw her trudging through the back path behind Woodmere Academy's west courtyard, a shovel in one hand and defiance in her eyes. Isla Moreno, a name you'd miss on a donor list, but not in a room where truth needed a voice. They punished her for speaking up against the wrong girl at the wrong time, in front of the wrong board members. Of course, that board included Regina Latham's father, a man who thought scholarships were charity and not investment. So they sentenced Isla to campus restoration, a fancy phrase for sending a 17-year-old to spend her summer under the thumb of a man none of the students had ever spoken to. Just the groundskeeper, they called him. Some whispered he lived in a shack near the East Woods, a man of few words who showed up for trimming, pruning, hauling, then disappeared like fog in the tree lines. I followed the story from afar at first, watching Isla from the tower windows as she bent over flower beds with blisters on her hands and her jaw clenched tight. But on the fifth day, when thunderclouds rolled in and the academy halls echoed with whispers that she might quit, I made my way out to the garden path. That's when I saw him. Not the man I expected, not a hunched old hermit, but tall and straight-backed, silver-haired but not weak. His name, she would later tell me, was Mr. Blake. He didn't speak when I passed, only looked up from his hedge clippers and gave the smallest nod. But something in his eyes, sharp, assessing, ancient, made me pause. Isla, soaking wet and covered in dirt, stood beside him like a statue, gripping the handle of a wheelbarrow full of mulch. And yet, there was something in the stillness between them, like an unspoken agreement, a silence that had weight. That evening, the staff room buzzed with curiosity. Someone said they saw Mr. Blake handing her a book during lunch, and others said she refused to take breaks. By week 2, Isla had stopped eating in the cafeteria. She stayed near the groundskeeper's cottage, perched behind the stone wall that marked the edge of school property. I snuck closer one day, heart hammering as I crouched near the hedgerow, and what I heard didn't make sense. He was reading poetry aloud. Byron, I think, and Isla was correcting him. Not disrespectfully, like she belonged in the conversation. Their voices faded into laughter, then silence, then something stranger still, the unmistakable sound of a cello. When I peeked over the edge, my breath caught. The overgrown path I remembered from my junior year was now cleared, revealing a garden unlike any other on campus, symmetrical, wild yet elegant, dotted with marble benches and a fountain shaped like a lion's head. Isla sat cross-legged on the grass, eyes closed, listening as Blake played from an antique phonograph. It didn't fit. Nothing about him fit the narrative we'd been told. The next day, I watched Isla arrive early, sun barely up, carrying not gloves or a shovel, but a leather-bound notebook. She sat under the old birch tree near his workshop, scribbling furiously while he polished a set of gardening shears like they were surgical tools. Whispers began to spread again. Regina Latham told everyone Isla was trying to seduce her way into inheritance. Others claimed Blake was a former spy. But I kept my distance until one rainy morning when Isla walked past me in the library, trailed by the scent of pine and something older. Books, maybe ink. She looked different. Still poor, still wearing those secondhand boots, but with the quiet poise of someone who'd stopped asking permission to exist. And later that week, I saw what confirmed everything. A car. Not just any car. A 1964 Rolls-Royce Phantom parked behind the greenhouse, matte black, engine purring like a lion held on a leash. I watched Mr. Blake emerge from the driver's side, dressed in a tailored coat that had no business near mulch, open the door for Isla, and hand her a wrapped package. Then he vanished again. No one else saw. No one else cared to. But I did. Because the punishment wasn't a punishment. It was a passage into a secret. One that stretched far beyond this school's hedges, and into the kind of story that changes the shape of people. They sent her to him to be forgotten. But what they didn't know was that the man tending their lawns didn't just own land. He owned legacies. And Isla? She was about to inherit more than anyone imagined. I had to see it for myself. Curiosity doesn't just kill cats. It whispers to people like me, the ones who watch from the shadows, the ones who sense when a story is unraveling right in front of them. That's why, 2 weeks after Isla's so-called punishment began, I followed her after dusk, slipping through the hedge path near the east wall, where she vanished every evening after her last assigned task. It was raining lightly, the kind of misty drizzle that makes everything feel more secret. I kept my distance, half expecting her to catch me, but Isla never turned around. She moved like someone with permission to cross boundaries. After 15 minutes of dodging low branches and soaked foliage, the trees parted, and I froze. Beyond the stone wall, just past the academy's overgrown outer line, stood something I never could have imagined. Wrought iron gates, old and vine-covered, creaked open as Isla passed through. And beyond them, God, the ground stretched out like something from a dream. Not just a garden, not just a field, an entire estate. I'm talking sculptures, an aviary, a greenhouse larger than the art building, and in the middle of it all, a house. No, a manor, 3 stories tall, wrapped in ivy, with soft golden light glowing behind antique glass windows. My mouth went dry. I thought maybe I'd stumbled into another century. Isla, meanwhile, walked straight through like she'd been raised there. She carried a book tucked under her arm, one I later learned Blake had given her, filled with handwritten notes in the margins and pages older than any first edition I'd ever seen. And then I saw him, Mr. Blake, only he wasn't wearing mud-stained overalls. He wore a gray waistcoat, crisp slacks, and shoes polished to a mirror finish. He looked regal. There's no other word for it. Not rich, royal. The way he moved, the way he opened the doors of the manor for Isla and let her enter first, told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't some aging gardener with a secret stash of money. This was his home, his land. And Isla wasn't just being mentored, she was being chosen. The next morning, Woodmere's courtyard was buzzing with new rumors. Some said Isla had been caught in Mr. Blake's cottage at midnight. Others claimed she was being groomed to inherit the property. But I knew better, because I'd seen what they hadn't. I'd seen her sitting across from Blake at a carved oak table, sipping tea, surrounded by ancient books and oil paintings that looked suspiciously like old European nobility. And I realized then, this wasn't a secret, it was a test. One she was passing with quiet brilliance. Later that week, I found Isla in the library, and against every instinct I had about staying out of other people's business, I walked up to her and asked, "Why you?" She closed the book in her lap slowly, and for a second, I thought she might tell me to leave. But instead, she whispered, "Because I didn't flinch." Then she handed me a slip of paper. "An address. Come tonight," she said. I did, and it changed everything. The second time I stepped onto Blake's estate, it wasn't as a stalker in the bushes, it was as a guest. He greeted me personally, offered a drink, and spoke with the kind of grace I'd only seen in documentaries about English diplomacy. In the drawing room, he showed us a photograph. A woman, young, Latina, beautiful, standing next to him at a vineyard in France. "My wife," he said, his voice soft. "She taught me that value doesn't come with bloodlines. It walks in with bare hands and earns its place." Isla reached across the table, placed her hand on his, and for a moment, I understood. He wasn't just training her. He was honoring someone through her. "The school believes I prune hedges for pleasure," he chuckled. "Let them believe it. People treat you more honestly when they think you're beneath them." That night, he opened the west wing of the estate for the first time in years. Inside, manuscripts, private letters from literary icons, and historical maps lined the walls. Isla moved among them like she belonged, because by then, she did. But while the air inside that estate felt heavy with knowledge and memory, outside, danger stirred. Blake's land was technically part of the Academy's historical grant, loaned by his family decades ago under a clause so obscure the current board likely didn't even understand it. But someone had found it. A clause that allowed the land to be reclaimed by the school's board under one condition. If the current caretaker, Mr. Blake, was deemed mentally or legally unfit. The next morning, Regina's father filed a motion for psychological review, a concern over Blake's influence on impressionable female students. They'd discovered the truth, and they were coming for it. And suddenly, Isla wasn't just a girl with a rake anymore. She was a threat to the very people who'd punished her to begin with. The hearing was set for a Tuesday morning, under the guise of an internal review, but everyone knew what it really was, a thinly veiled attempt to seize land and silence legacy. I sat in the second row of the Board of Trustees chamber, watching Isla sit beside Mr. Blake, not in fear, but in calm defiance, while the headmaster shuffled through his notes like a man preparing a show trial. They accused Blake of impropriety, of creating an unusual and unmonitored relationship with a student, weaponizing every quiet moment of mentorship as if it were scandal. But what they didn't expect, what none of them expected, was the folder Isla placed on the table before the hearing began. Inside were deeds, letters, photographs, and at the very top, a notarized document Blake's wife had written years ago before her passing, a codicil to the land agreement, making Isla the legal steward of the estate in the event of any claim against Blake's capacity. The room turned ice cold. One by one, board members leaned forward to read the signature, to examine the crest sealed in wax, realizing too late that the girl they tried to bury now held the shovel. Isla stood slowly and spoke with precision, about legacy, about earned trust, about how true wealth was never money, but memory and meaning and the courage to pass it on. You punished me for being poor, she said, but the man you called a gardener taught me that some inherit land, while others inherit responsibility. I know which one I choose. There was no applause, just a silence that vibrated with the truth. By the following week, Blake's estate had been formally separated from the academy, its gates reopened not for private schooling, but for public learning. It became a haven, a historical and cultural trust bearing his late wife's name. Isla never once claimed ownership. She called herself its caretaker, just like Blake once had. And when she received her Oxford acceptance letter a month later, with a full fellowship signed by the Sterling Foundation itself, she simply folded it, smiled, and said, "I guess I'll have to pack my boots." As for Blake, he retired fully that spring, leaving the estate in her hands with the quiet satisfaction of a man who'd planted something deeper than flowers. And me? I still tell people how I watched a scholarship girl become the steward of a hidden empire, not through rebellion or wealth, but by refusing to be small. Because sometimes the greatest revenge isn't power. It's purpose.